You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.
You're listening to the Ballin in the Six podcast, your nugget source for all NBA news, rumors, season previews, playoff discussions, and in-depth analysis from Chicco Nacion of the Scores basketball division within the heart of the Six, Toronto, Ontario. Here are your hosts, Brandon Caputo and Chicco Nacion.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another installment of the Ballin in the Sixth NBA podcast, right here in the Armchair GM Sports Network, your March 4th, 2021 edition. Your source North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans, delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. Find us on social media for updates, giveaways, and sponsorship promo codes by following the podcast on Twitter at Armchair GM Pod, as well as liking us on Facebook and Instagram. As well, you can listen to us on many platforms, including Spreaker.com, the free Spreaker app, as well on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, CastBox, and Deezer by searching the Armchair GM Sports Network, of course. And lastly, our beautiful user-friendly website, armchairgmsports.com, for all things regarding our network, including articles, podcast episodes, sponsors, and contributor bios on there. Everything's there for you guys. Please go and check that out, and please give us a like and a subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us right now. As always, I'm one of your hosts of the Ball in the Six podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter at Caputs13 with a Canadian Z, and I'm always very pleased to be joined on the NBA portion of the network. My good friend, he is an NBA news editor for thescore.com. He is Chicco Nacion. You can follow him on Twitter at Chicco_N. Chicco, welcome back, and sure, it's an exciting time for you getting to cover the NBA All-Star Game. We're at the midseason mark of the 2021 NBA season, so it's good to have you back on here for another episode.
Yeah, it's definitely been a while for sure, and yeah, having an All-Star Game for sure, reaching the halfway point in the season, and hopefully they can somehow make it through and be able to complete a full NBA campaign.
We can only hope. So this first segment today is going to be brought to you by Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, home of the best pizza wing combos in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Voted from Niagara this week, 4 years running. Visit them at carmine'spizzeria.ca, available for call and pickup or delivery. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, way too good. Speaking of way too good, Chicco, let's take a look at the standings. That we're almost basically at the midway point of the NBA season here, the shortened season, and at the top of the each conference here, the Utah Jazz and the Philadelphia 76ers. So are you a little bit surprised with those two teams leading their respective conferences so far as we're reaching the halfway point of the 2021 season?
Maybe a little surprised to see Utah and even the Phoenix Suns going 1-2 in the Western Conference. Utah definitely had a lot to prove last year after a 3-1 collapse in the first round due to Denver Nuggets, but I think what a lot of people forget is that they were missing their leading scorer, Bojan Bogdanovic, a huge important part of their offense. And, if he was in the lineup for that first round series against the Nuggets, it's hard for me to say that collapse would have happened. And who knows, it could have been the Jazz that would have made that run to the conference finals. But, they returned most of that team from last year, and it's been a pretty solid group, and they've continued to play strong defensively this year. And, it shows in the results so far. And I think the Suns being number 2 is probably the bigger shock because, this is a team that didn't even qualify for the playoffs last year. But they did have that momentum in the bubble with the run that they had and nearly getting into the playing game. But the addition of Chris Paul has obviously done wonders for this team. These young guys are able to learn from a vet and future Hall of Famer like him.
And then looking at the rest of the Western Conference there, you have the Clippers and the Lakers sitting at 3-4. Does that concern you at all that the Clippers and Lakers are not at the top of the conference, or do you see that as kind of just, typical, riding through the regular season, and once the playoffs start, they kick it into another gear there?
Yeah, I think with those two teams, as long as if you were to face one of those guys and they were the 8th or 7th seed, I'm sure you'd be concerned if you were a 1 and 2 seed playing them. If they were one of the lower seeds. And I mean, it's hard to say if home court advantage is really going to be a problem or a factor this year. Maybe in a place like Denver, perhaps, where the altitude could play a factor. But for the Clippers and Lakers, the focus is on getting through this regular season, getting through it healthy, and making sure you're ready to go when it counts, when the games really, really matter in the postseason.
And the thing I want to mention and quickly touch on with you here is the 9, 10, and 11 seeded teams there in the West, Chico. The Golden State Warriors obviously had that down year last year with a lot of injuries, getting a top pick, and then obviously you expected them to be kind of back in that conversation again with all of their great players there. They're sitting in 9th place right now, 19 and 17. Does that concern you that they're kind of like right there with the Mavericks for the 8th spot, or did you kind of expect them to be around that area going into this year? You didn't expect them to be, one of the top 5 teams in the conference, especially after the last season that they had.
I kind of thought they'd be a little bit higher in the standings, but I mean, they are missing one of the greatest shooters of all time in Klay Thompson. So I think for sure they were still going to be in contention for a playoff spot. But I think in terms of attaining a higher seed, that was going to be tough. Kelly Oubre got off to a slow start. He was kind of like the big major acquisition for the Warriors this offseason. It was kind of a reactive move after Thompson was ruled out. He's starting to turn it around a little bit, but Steph Curry has really raised his game almost, he's arguably playing his best basketball since he last won the MVP award about 5 years ago. And Draymond Green, the way the two have chemistry, they played with each other for so many years. It really shows in the way the Warriors' offense is run, as everything revolves around those guys. And Draymond Green's a guy that, he's not putting up major points on the board, but I mean, if you look the way he facilitates the offense and play makes and creates for others, he leads the team in assists. He had a career high, I believe, 18, 19 assists just a few weeks ago. He controls his game with his playmaking, and obviously he's still a very good defender and is versatile and is a key part of the Warriors on that end. But the way he drives that Warriors offense has been just as important as Steph playing at the level he's playing at right now.
Mm-hmm. And then it's weird to see Golden State, at this point, because we've obviously seen them at the top of the Western Conference for so long that it's kind of weird to see them floating around for that final playoff spot. But then the other two teams I wanted to mention were the Grizzlies and the Pelicans. Obviously, the two very young teams there, Chico, John Morant and Zion Williamson, being the 1 and 2 picks, the draft a few years back now. But you'd expected them kind of to take that next step. Do you feel like both of those teams are kind of taking a step back from what we had expected them going into this year, sitting 10th and 11th in the Western Conference right now, and with some very talented players?
I don't know if I would say they've taken a step back. The Grizzlies, they've had some delays this year with COVID protocols. I think they had some their games postponed this year, so I'm sure that's definitely disrupted their rhythm. They haven't actually had their full roster together either. Jaren Jackson has missed basically the whole season, and they're now just getting Justice Winslow, who was a big part of the Andre Iguodala trade last year. And he's starting to play well in his brief return so far to the lineup. So I think Memphis still hasn't even reached – they're still really scratching the surfaces. They haven't really had their full lineup together yet. The Pelicans, I think we expected them to be better defensively this year. That was a huge problem for the team last year. And when they brought in Stan Van Gundy this offseason, a guy who's been known for his defense throughout his years in the association, you thought that the Pelicans would probably improve in that end. And I think they showed a little bit of improvement at the beginning, but overall, as a season as a whole, they haven't really taken that next step defensively. And if they want to, compete for a spot in the playoffs, that's where they're going to need the most improvements. I think offensively, there's so many weapons on this team, but if they can't stop the opposing team from scoring on them, it's not going to matter.
Mm-hmm. So interesting stuff going on there in the Western Conference. But moving over to the East, Chico, obviously, like I mentioned, the 76ers with a half-game lead over the Nets for first place in the East. And then you got the Bucks third, Celtics fourth, the New York Knicks, surprisingly, at fifth. And then you basically have a crapshoot there from 6 all the way down to essentially the 10th spot there, from Miami all the way down to the Chicago Bulls. So what have you seen from the Eastern Conference so far, and what has surprised you the most other than the New York Knicks being in a playoff spot?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the story right now in the Eastern Conference. Just the Knicks even being at 500, and let alone challenging for such a home court advantage in the playoffs. I think it's been remarkable what they've done this year. Tom Thibodeau has really been this is another guy that was a defensive minded coach all those years with the Bulls. He had some really solid teams. Defense was the heart of their success, and he seems to have carried that over and that mentality over to the New York Knicks. And Julius Randle kind of been moving around throughout his whole career. Started with the Lakers, went to the Pelicans, and now has kind of found a home, it looks like, with the Knicks. And deservedly so. He got his first All-Star selection this year, and that's definitely been one of the stories of the first half of the season. LaMelo Ball, 6th place with the Charlotte Hornets. He's been really exciting and given life to pretty much a fan base that hasn't really seen that much success. And, they're probably one of the more exciting teams to watch in the league. And now he's starting for the team, and he's been able to just take off and take his game to another level so far.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of the top of the conference there? Do you think the 76ers are going to be able to hold on to that, or do you think that the Brooklyn Nets, with all their firepower and seeming to essentially put up mass amount of points every game without playing much defense, looks like they're going off the offense wins championships here, Chicco? Do you think that they're going to be able to overtake the 76ers for first place in the Eastern Conference when this is all said and done?
I'd like to think of Brooklyn chances are high. I think they can definitely pass the Sixers to take that top spot. Like I said, I don't know how much that matters to these teams, just because of the fact that there isn't much of a home court advantage, and I know some teams are allowing limited attendance at their games, but obviously I just don't see like 1,000, 2,000 fans being that much of a factor in a playoff series as it was in the past when you had large, intimidating fan bases that you could really feed off the energy. But like you said with the Nets, offensively, I think there were a lot of concerns of the way that James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant would fit. 3 guys are all ball dominant players, thrive in isolation. So I think what's been the key to success is Harden kind of being that main facilitator and point guard for the team. He's been absolutely fantastic in that role for the Nets, and obviously his scoring numbers aren't what they were when he was with Houston and leading the league in scoring, but him being able to facilitate for Kyrie and company, I think, has been really impressive so far. And obviously they're going to have to shore up things on the defensive end if they really want to compete for a championship, but you have to like their chances right now with all the firepower they have.
Mm-hmm. You wouldn't know how that mix would kind of play out, but it has been working so far with Harden, Kyrie, and KD. So we'll have to see if it down the stretch here they can hold on to that and overtake the 76ers for the number 1 spot in the East. But quickly before we hit the break, Chicco, from one end of the spectrum to the other, we've got the last place teams going for the number 1 overall lottery pick. You have the Detroit Pistons, who unfortunately took down the Toronto Raptors last game with their COVID issues, which we'll get into later in the show. But they're sitting at 10-25, and the Minnesota Timberwolves at 7-29. What is going on with these two teams, and which team, when it's all said and done, do you think is going to be the number 1 lottery pick from this 2021 season?
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota's kind of been a mess for a while. I mean, they had that one playoff appearance under Tom Thibodeau a few years ago, and they also had Jimmy Butler, but I mean, Minnesota just hasn't been able to find any sort of success since the end of the Kevin Garnett era. And they had Ryan Saunders take over. He was fired recently after parts of 3 seasons, and he wasn't really able to establish any sort of identity with this team. And, they made the surprising move to find a permanent full-time replacement for him in Toronto Raptors assistant Chris Finch, which is a pretty curious decision to have made mid-season. I thought they might have let Saunders ride it out and see what they can do, but it wasn't working for the T-Wolves, and they've definitely got their work cut out for them. Another complicating factor for them this season is that if their pick, I believe, if it falls out of the top 3, that goes to Golden State. So if you're a T-Wolves fan, you kind of hope that they remain near the bottom just so that they can actually get another pick that they could rebuild off to at least take from this season. But it's a tough situation there in Minnesota, and it doesn't help with D'Angelo Russell being injured and Karl Anthony Towns also missing some time this year because he actually had COVID as well. And going to the East with the Detroit Pistons, I mean, confusing offseason to start off with the amount of big men and centers they decide to just pick up and just create a logjam at the position. And Blake Griffin has sat out for the past month and a half or so. They're going to try to look to find a suitor for him and see if any team would want to trade for him. The chances are he's probably getting bought out. Derrick Rose has already been dealt back to the New York Knicks. And so I think the T-Wolves have a bigger chance, a greater chance of finishing towards the bottom. I just think with the Pistons, you have players like Jeremy Grant, who's in the running for most improved player of the year, and some young guys on that team that are showing promise that I think they're going to eventually start to put some wins together and maybe distance themselves a little bit from the bottom, but they'll still be among the worst teams in the league. But I think the T-Wolves have a greater chance of finishing rock bottom this year.
Yeah, and we'll see. It hasn't been kindly to the number one lottery teams as of late, so we'll have to see if the Timberwolves can get lucky in that regard and hold on to that number one pick, but we'll get into that when we get closer to the offseason. But with that said, we're going to take a commercial break on the show today. We're going to come back and get Chico's thoughts on the NBA All-Star Game for this year, how that's going to work, and his thoughts on both rosters. So stay right here. We'll be right back on the Ballin' in the Six podcast and right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network.
J&L Flooring is a Niagara-based specialty flooring and design company. They take great pride in providing elite customer service and support. They are a specialty flooring and decor boutique shop with a beautiful showroom, great pricing, and a wide variety and truly unique selection of products. All their products are environmentally friendly and responsibly produced, so you can feel great about your flooring choices. Their goal as a local business is to build authentic relationships based on honesty and integrity that they foster with respect and authenticity. Offering a unique and wide range of quality products presented by a knowledgeable and patient team, they connect with their customers to simplify the process to make their life easier and to make their homes beautiful. Visit them at 4424 Montrose Road, Niagara Falls, or find out more at jnlflooring.com. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 5 p.m., and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. 905-358-3299 J&L Flooring.
The Spicy Olive Bar and Grill is located on the top of Clifton Hill and just a 5-minute walk from the majestic Niagara Falls. It is conveniently nestled in the heart of the tourist district. A family-owned and operated business, the Spicy Olive opened its doors in May of 2003 and has since been established as an authentic and unique Italian restaurant and bar. Its rustic ambiance and time-worn finishing provide a warm and inviting dining experience. Offering an array of delicious dishes, they specialize in authentic Italian cuisine, homemade sauces, fresh ingredients, and consistently providing a strong foundation on which they build their menu. As night falls, the Spicy Olive shifts to a lively lounge where drinks and live music come together to make a perfect evening. For more than 15 years, they have provided not only for their dedicated locals, but their customers from all over the world with authentic Italian food and great live entertainment. Open daily 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. for dinner and till 2 a.m. for drinks. Check out their new menu and book reservations on their website at Spicy Olive Bar and Grill, it's with an E at the end, .com, or call 905-371-2323 for reservations as well. The Spicy Olive Bar and Grill.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network, the Niagara region's best local source for North American sports podcasting coverage. By sports fans, for sports fans.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to segment 2 of today's Ballin' in the Six podcast. Brandon Caputo and Chicco Nacion from the Scores Basketball Division back with you here. And today's second segment is brought to you by Custom PPE, Canada's leading face mask provider, best prices and quickest turnaround. Built from right here in the Niagara region. Order today at customppe.ca. We've got ours. Time to get yours. Custom face masks to keep us all safe. Again, customppe.ca. Chicco, let's take a look at the NBA All-Stars. Coming right around the corner here. This Sunday, March 7th, is going to be the All-Star Game, the revised All-Star Game festivities that was supposed to originally take place in Indianapolis. It has since been postponed, and they will host the festivities once again in 2024. But for the time being, they are still going to have an All-Star Game. It's going to take place in Atlanta, and they're going to get all the festivities done in one day, which we had discussed in the pre-show. off air here that it was an interesting choice of the time to start that and to get all of the festivities done in the one day. The dunk contest is apparently going to be taking place at halftime. So as far as the structure of how this event is going to work, Chicco, just how do you think that they're going to be able to get through this smoothly?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's going to be pretty chaotic. You're going to try to fit in basically as a kind of like a pregame lead up, have the skills challenge, have a 3-point shootout. I think those two are kind of, because they're timed events, you can kind of gauge as to how long that will take. I think that's fine having that into lead up, but I felt like if you wanted to hold this across, have it all in one day, I felt like an earlier start time would probably be better. And I don't see the point in putting a dunk contest at halftime. I know there are only 3 dunkers in this year's field, which is really small compared to years past, but I just don't see how you can possibly fit in a dunk competition within half an hour unless you're doing 1 dunk each, which I think is kind of going to be pretty tough for these guys to put something creative all in that 1 dunk, but also at the same time, I don't think you want to stretch it too far because you don't really know, what to really expect out of the competitors this year. And so I think if our Adam Silver, I probably would have had the dunk contest before the All-Star game itself, just so that you have kind of a little bit more flexibility depending on, if the dunk competition is surprisingly good, then maybe you can expand it a little bit longer and be able to drag it out a little bit more. But they're going to be holding it at halftime, and we'll have to see how that goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have to. It's a wait and see type thing of how they're going to get through this. It's interesting to see, after this is all said and done, if it was a success or not to have it all the festivities in one day. But again, it's just to limit the contact and get it all done in one day during a COVID season. So I understand from that perspective. But as far as the All-Star game goes itself, so obviously the team captains will be Kevin Durant, LeBron James. Kevin Durant will not be playing due to an injury, but he still will be picking his team. We'll just go over the starters real quick, Chicco, from each division or each conference. Sorry. Obviously, the Greek Freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Bradley Beal, Joel Embiid, Kyrie Irving, and Jason Tatum from the Eastern Conference. And from the Western Conference, you have Steph Curry, Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, and Kawhi Leonard. So from those two rosters right there, which one is more impressive to you as far as the starting lineup goes?
You have to probably go with the West. The star power, I think, in the West is, it's very impressive. Down year in, year out. For years, just making it as a guard in the Western Conference was tough. And, you see guys like Mike Conley, for all those great years he had with the Memphis Grizzlies, he was unable to make an All-Star appearance because of the depth in the backcourt the Western Conference has. And a guy like Damian Lillard, who's probably right there in the MVP conversation, wasn't even picked as a starter for the Western Conferences. I think that kind of speaks volume to the amount of depth of talent that's in the Western Conference.
Mm-hmm. And as we go through the reserves for both teams there, Jaylen Brown, James Harden, Zach LaVine, Julius Randle from the New York Knicks, which is surprising there, Ben Simmons, Nikola Vucevic, and Domantas Sabonis from the Indiana Pacers. And then from the Western Conference, Anthony Davis obviously is injured and will not be playing in the game, but he was a reserve. Paul George, Rudy Gobert, Damian Lillard, Donovan Mitchell, Chris Paul, Zion Williamson, and Devin Booker. So do you think that that all these were pretty warranted here, or were there some players that you had pointed out that were snubbed that you probably thought deserved to be on, given the determination of an all-star for either conference?
Originally, Sabonis was left off the roster. He did get he was selected as the replacement for Kevin Durant after he announced that he wasn't able to compete with his hamstring injury. So Sabonis, for me, was the biggest snub out of the East. He was actually the first player to average at least 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists and not be selected for the All-Star. So I think they got it right pretty much for the most part on the East. In terms of the West, Devin Booker was probably, again, he obviously made it onto the All-Star game eventually, but Devin Booker was probably the biggest snub in the West. The Suns are having a fantastic year, second in the Western Conference right now, and a big part of that has been Devin Booker. Now his numbers aren't as high as they were last year, but the fact that he's able to improve in different aspects, like his post-up game, has been a lot better than what he's had in recent years. And being able to take on a leadership role alongside Chris Paul, I think that for sure it kind of has more value and, should be rewarded. And, the fact that the Suns are right there in the Western Conference standings, I think Booker should have easily been on that team in the first place. It could make a place for Mike Conley. The Jazz have the best record in the league. I think they got it right with picking their two All-Stars in Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. But I think if you were to pick a third member, Mike Conley could have been a guy that you could have gave it to. He's having a resurgent season with the Jazz right now, and you kind of wish that he finally made it after all those years with the Grizzlies and putting up all-star numbers, but not necessarily getting the recognition of the selection. But that would probably be my other choice in the Western Conference.
And Julius Randle, I think, for the New York Knicks has to be mentioned too, Chico, just for the fact that where this team is right now in a playoff spot, and a lot of his teammates were advocating for him to be an all-star, after making a few shots there, the group celebrations and shouting out the all-star chants to him. Just how feel-good story here for the New York Knicks this year, which nobody had expected, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I mean, he's always been a pretty solid player. Like, the last couple of seasons, like, he put up 21 points a game with the Pelicans 2 years ago, and last year with the Knicks, he averaged 20. But he's just taken his game to another level this year. Career highs in points and rebounds. The assists, I think, are a huge part. Like, he's always been a good passing big man, but the fact that he's averaging, more than 5 assists a game is quite impressive. Mm-hmm. And it's not like the Knicks are loaded with offensive firepower too. So again, that kind of is more impressive, that he's finding guys for high percentage looks and they're being able to get good opportunities based on the attention he draws. And he's also shooting the ball over 40% from downtown. Last year, he only shot 27%. His career high was 34% a few years ago. So that's quite a significant improvement. And top it all off, you're doing it in the pressure of the Big Apple in New York City. And so, Knicks fans haven't had much to cheer about so far, but I think you have to be pleased you're a Knicks fan to see the development of Randle, and potentially, maybe this is a place that he can stay long term and is a guy you can build around going forward. He is just 26 years old after all.
Yeah, we'll see if Stephen A. Smith wants to still throw that Julius Randle jersey away on live television on First Take, but that's a discussion for another day. But lastly, Chico, about the format of the All-Star Game in general, it's interesting now how they go about it. So if you want to explain to our listeners how it works, as far as they pick the starters, and then you can essentially pick anybody you want. That doesn't have to be from the Eastern or Western Conference. So essentially, the team captains can kind of pick who they want and kind of have like a draft style, and not just be kind of forced to pick and have the Eastern or Western Conference starters on each team.
Yeah, it's a nice shakeup as well. I mean, if you pretty much go the East and West, I mean, the West is definitely a lot more in terms of talent. There's a lot more depth in the West, and it's pretty obvious nowadays. But yeah, with the draft that's happening tonight, basically you get a choice. You choose from the starters first, and then you move on to the reserves, but you don't have to pick guys from your respective conference. You can mix and match. And that way you really get the best of the best players.
Mm-hmm. And is there, if you were the betting man, Chico, who do you think would be the number one pick tonight for Kevin Durant or LeBron James? Who do you think is going to be picked first here?
I think you have to go Giannis, but I mean, it kind of depends how you want to, shape your team around. I mean, it'd be a pretty scary deal to see Durant and Giannis in the same front court with all that length court coverage defensively. But, I mean, it kind of depends on how you want to build your team around.
Do you think it would be interesting and something funny there if the Laker, LeBron James, would take the Clipper and Kawhi Leonard first? Do you think he'd make him wait there a little bit?
He could. It would be interesting. I probably wouldn't go with Kawhi first, but hey, you want to go for defense and lock him down? I mean, there's no better player than Kawhi one-on-one defensively.
Yeah, it definitely would be an interesting story for the media as well, but in Los Angeles. But with that said, we're going to take our last commercial break on the show today. We're going to come back and get Chico's thoughts on some Toronto Raptors news here and kind of how their season's been shaping out. So stay right here. I'll be right back on the Ballin' in the Six podcast and right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network.
Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, serving traditional-style Italian pizzas made with the freshest, top-quality ingredients. Loaded subs and their famous chicken wings, winners of the Reader's Choice Diamond Award, 4 years running from Niagara this week for Best Pizza and Wings in Niagara Falls. Home of the best tray and wing combo in town for the price and quality. Open daily from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., located on the corner of Drummond Road and Dunn Street. Available for call-ahead pickup or delivery at 905-374-4400. Make sure to like them on Facebook and view their website for their menu at carmine'spizzeria.ca. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, way too good. As we all adjust to this new world that we're living in today, masks are now mandatory, and Niagara's own Custom PPE is Canada's leading face mask provider. Visit them online at customppe.ca and choose between several mask options with different colors and sizes. Add your organization, company, or team logo so you make your face masks unique. Available to purchase online 24/7 at customppe.ca and shipped within 1 week. They have the best prices and quickest turnaround in Canada, and no order is too big or too small. Also offering custom floor stickers as well as face and counter shields for your business or workplace. Visit customppe.ca and use the code ARMCHAIR at checkout for 20% off your custom or blank face mask today. Custom PPE, Canada's leading face mask provider. Attention job seekers, if you are currently looking for work in the Niagara region, you owe it to yourself to check out the services provided by the Niagara Employment Help Center, located at 6100 Throatstone Road, Niagara Falls, directly across from the Camisos Plaza. Their free services include resume and cover letter writing, community resource and referral information, local labor market information, job search strategies, assistance with clarifying employment training and career goals, employment counseling and job search support, second career information and registration assistance, and all their services are currently provided by appointment only. So give them a call at 905-358-0021 or visit their website at ehc.on.ca, the Niagara Employment Help Center. This Employment Ontario program is funded by the Government of Ontario.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network, the Niagara region's best local source for North American sports podcasting coverage. By sports fans, for sports fans.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the final segment of today's Ballin' in the Six podcast right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network. Cappy and Chicco Nacion from the Scores Basketball Division back with you here. And in this last segment today, it is brought to you by J&O Flooring, a Niagara-based specialty flooring and design company. Simplified processes make home beautiful are their specialties. Visit them at jnoflooring.com to start on the floor of your dreams today. So, Chicco, let's take a look at the Toronto Raptors. And again, it's been an interesting season for the Raptors so far. Again, not the greatest of seasons. They're sitting in that logjam there from 6 to 9 there in the Eastern Conference. Currently sitting in 8th with 17-18 record with the Heat, the Hornets, and the Pacers all, and even the Bulls all there, kind of fighting for those playoff spots there. So, what have you thought of the Raptors season? There's a lot going on, so I know it's a tough question, but they obviously didn't have an all-star this year, and obviously they had the COVID outbreak happen within their team just before the all-star break, and as bad as that was, it really only affected 2 games. The one other game against the Bulls was postponed, but kind of a lucky break for the Raptors having that happen just before the all-star break, and hopefully coming out of the all-star break they can have that behind them and kind of focus on trying to get into one of these final playoff spots in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a roller coaster of a season for them. You know, they started out 2-8, were near the bottom of the standings, and the conversation was about, are they going to be sellers at the deadline? And more specifically, is this the end of Kyle Lowry's term in Toronto? And that could still be the case. I mean, I think the decision will ultimately be in Kyle Lowry's hands if he would like to go seek a trade for a contender. And I think the Raptors would be doing themselves a disfavor by not listening at least to whatever is out there for a guy like Lowry. But like you said, it's been a weird season. They've been in Florida, they've been in Tampa Bay this entire time, and unfortunately with COVID restrictions and things like that there. It hasn't been handled as well in Florida, so you kind of had the feeling that this was going to happen eventually. And fortunately, it comes closer towards the All-Star break where they're going to have some time to kind of go through their health and safety protocols and be diligent with this and make sure that this outbreak doesn't become worse than what it is. But you have to admire the way that this teams have been able to bounce back and are right back in a playoff spot and could potentially compete for a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. I mean, they're only a game behind the Boston Celtics right now. And if you were to tell a Raptor fan at the beginning of the year, after they started 2-8, that they'd be a game out of 4th place, I think they'd take that in a heartbeat. And I mean, considering the situation, they are in Tampa Bay, they're not at home, they have a makeshift practice court and gym in a hotel. Those are just some of the things that, we know of, but I'm sure there's definitely a lot more challenges playing away from home and in another country for sure.
Mm-hmm. And again, like you mentioned, a bad start, but they've been able to find their game a little bit here. And other than the outbreak that they had, which, it affected them a little bit, but they were still able to beat the Rockets, who were obviously moving on from the James Harden era there. And then obviously that's got to be a tough loss though against the Detroit Pistons, the last place team in the Eastern Conference right before the All-Star break. That's just obviously not the greatest of situations. They've got the Celtics tonight before hitting the All-Star break, but what did you think about that game against the Pistons? And obviously a lot of factors go into that with missing out on most of your coaching staff and some key players as well. Just how tough of a blow was that in that game against the last place team in the East?
Yeah, it's a tough one considering they swept the Milwaukee Bucks in the pair of meetings that they had just a few weeks ago. They beat the Philadelphia 76ers. They've had some really nice wins, and unfortunately they have a stinker last night against the Pistons. They allow 129 points, and they just didn't really come out to play. And defensively, that just can't happen. 129 points to a team that is the worst team, one of the worst teams in the league. And I mean, Norman Powell probably was the only guy showed up. 36 points last night and 14 of 20 shooting. But it's also one of those situations where there aren't really much options that the Raptors had as well. They put together a makeshift starting lineup there with Yuta Watanabe, Terrence Davis also getting starts. Those are guys that ideally you'd have coming off the bench, but were forced to start due to the situations with Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby among the guys that were out due to health and safety protocols. And so, hopefully the Raptors can, put together a stronger performance tonight against the Boston Celtics. It's going to be tough. Second night of a back-to-back. But it would be nice to end the first half on a pretty good note. And they will also end up on 500, which I think you'd take as well.
Mm-hmm. And right now they currently sit 16th out of 30 teams with points per game, averaging 112.6 points a game, and giving up 111 per game, which is 10th out of 30 teams. So are you pretty pleased with those points per game and points allowed, considering the start that they had to this season, kind of mid-pack there?
Yeah, I think it's impressive that they're 10th best and defensively. Considering they lost a really high IQ defender in Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka in the offseason. I think center has been one of the glaring holes for this team all season, and losing the IQ and the offensive punch, but for these guys, but also defensively, Ibaka was a great rim protector. Gasol wasn't putting up those huge numbers, but the way he was able to play vertical on drives to net, he was just always a heads-up smart defender. And so losing that from a really solid defense last year definitely hurt, but to their credit, they still are one of the better defensive teams in the league. And offensively, they have the 10th ranked offense in the offensive rating. That's also pretty impressive. Their half-court offense was a bit of a struggle last year, but I think with Chris Finch, this was a guy, who's now the Minnesota T-Wolves head coach, but he's done some work in the past with guys like James Harden, and he's worked with some offensive-minded players. And I think during his short time in Toronto, he was able to kind of impart some of that on the team as well. And it shows the fact that they were able to put together a top 10 offense, despite not really having much production out of the center position.
And lastly, actually, I got two more quick things for you. One, obviously, I mentioned that they don't have an all-star this year. Was there somebody that you felt deserved the all-star distinction, or did you think that with the season that they're having, there wasn't anybody that was kind of worthy of that distinction? But was there somebody that so far has impressed you as the player that you've liked so far most from this team?
I think if you were to give if there was a guy in the Raptors who was going to be named the All-Star, I think Fred VanVleet would have been the player. He's easily having the best year of his career, fresh off the brand new contract he got in the offseason, averaging 20 points, almost 7 assists, averaging almost 2 steals per game. Like, he's been great for the team. He had that career performance as well where he set the franchise record in points in a game. And I think if there was one guy you would have to give an all-star selection to, it would have to be him. And I mean, not just the way he produces on the scoreboard, but I mean, he leads the league in deflections. He's second in loose balls recovered. It's pretty incredible what this guy has done, coming from an undrafted guard out of Wichita State to, almost earning, in my opinion, an all-star selection this year. And, he's not a big dude. He's not the most athletic person, but man, does he ever work as hard as ever to make the most of his abilities? And he's just, I talk about high IQ defenders like Gasol. I mean, Fred VanVleet's one of them. The way he's able to just time his doubles on players and poke balls loose. I mean, this guy's only 6'1", barely 200 pounds, yet, he's able to compete and defend with the best of the guards and even some bigs as well.
Mm-hmm. It goes to show that bringing him back on that multi-year extension in the offseason was big for this team, and lucky to have him back for sure. But the last thing I wanted to mention was, obviously, you touched on a little bit that they're playing in Tampa Bay this year, and we've known what it's been like down there with the pandemic and kind of things, according to them, back to normal. A lot of things open down there, not a lot of protocol going on in the state of Florida in general. But what have you thought of the Amalie Arena, obviously the home of the Tampa Bay Lightning, being the temporary home for the Raptors here? Their average attendance is about 10,000, just under 11,000 per game, which sits at 10th out of the 30 teams. But do you think that they've kind of been at a disservice just for the fact that Florida, being a state that a lot of people from the country flock to, and a lot of away fans like to attend games as well? Do you think that they've kind of been at a disadvantage of walking into some home games that have basically sometimes been 50-50, or maybe even worse, to the fact that to the point where they're almost an away team playing at home in their temporary home in Tampa Bay?
I mean, it certainly doesn't help. I mean, there have been some games. I remember there was a game against the Celtics this year, and they had "Let's Go Celtics" chants, and you could hear that pretty loud and clear. I don't think it really affects the players that they've had 2,000 fans cheering for the Celtics instead. But it is definitely weird, going into a home game and not having, I guess you could say, fans on your side. But yeah, it's one of those. It's been a unordinary year for a lot of people and for sports in general in 2020, and this is just kind of the reality of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Once they get back to the 6, I'm sure it's going to be a hero's welcome back, because it's been essentially 2 seasons now since the Toronto Raptors have actually played at home in Canada and in Toronto. So I'm sure you and many others will be welcoming them back with open arms.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I could say that for a lot of NBA teams, but I think it's going to be great once they finally have fans back in arenas. But, all we can do is just wait until that day comes.
Mm-hmm. So that's it for today's show, Chicco, unless you got anything to add to the end of the show here. Hopefully we'll have you back on to discuss the NBA playoffs whenever that takes place. But it's been fun and good discussing the mid-season with you here, and going into the All-Star break. We've actually made it through here with not a whole lot of postponements like we've had in the NHL. So the NBA, once again, I think is doing a good job here, even though they are traveling, unlike the bubble that they had last season.
Yeah, I mean, all things considered, even like they've released every weekend. I'm sure all the other leagues do this as well, I believe, but They do release details to how many people test positive, every week when they do testing. And ever since, obviously, there were the bigger numbers at the start of the year, they've kept it relatively low. I think 7 was the latest on the testing results. 7 new people have tested positive, but most of that has been with the Raptors, and whether it be players or coaching staffs. I'm not sure what's included in that figure, but I think they've done a pretty decent job considering, there are some postponements for sure, but I think you have to do that out of an abundance of caution and just to make sure there aren't any outbreaks that would make things worse.
No, absolutely. They have to do their due diligence with this. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of the Ballin' in the Six podcast, right here in the Armchair GM Sports Network, your source North American sports coverage by sports fans for sports fans, delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. As always, I'm one of your hosts of this podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter at Caputs13, the Canadian Z, and you can follow my co-host for the NBA portion of the network. He is Chicco Nacion. You can follow him on Twitter at Chico_N. Again, he's an NBA news editor from thescore.com. Go and check out his articles as well. Chicco, thanks so much for taking the time once again, and I'll look forward to having you back on here, hopefully for the playoffs.
No problem, man. Anytime.
Big thank you to all of our great sponsors. Swell Put Us On, support the network, keeping the show on the air. Make sure you're checking them out and telling them that the Armchair GM sent you. And finally, to you viewers out there and NBA fans for listening in for this episode. Once again, this is the Ballin' in the Six podcast on the Armchair GM Sports Network by sports fans for sports fans. Enjoy the All-Star game. We'll see you guys next time.